July 1927. Foster mother Ida Bollender goes to get a glass of water for an unexpected visitor. When she returns to the baby's room, she discovers a scene of pure horror. Marilyn Monroe's grandmother is pressing a pillow over 1-year-old Norma Jean's face, trying to suffocate the helpless infant. This wasn't a tragic accident. This was a deliberate attempt by a mentally ill woman to end the life of the baby who would become the world's most famous actress. The incident that happened at the Bollender foster home would become family lore, retold for decades as the moment that proved mental illness ran deep in the Monroe bloodline. Tonight, I'll reveal the shocking details of this attempted infanticide, and how this terrifying encounter shaped Marilyn Monroe's lifelong fear of abandonment and death. This is the story Hollywood never wanted you to know. Subscribe now to discover the dark family secret that haunted Marilyn Monroe her entire life. 1927. The Bollender Foster Home, Hawthorne, California. I am 1 year old, lying peacefully in my crib, completely unaware that madness runs in my family like a poison passed down through generations. My grandmother Della Monroe has just returned from India, where she went to be with her estranged husband, but the malaria she contracted there is the least of her problems. Mental illness has already claimed my grandfather, who died in an institution after years of violent seizures and dementia. Now it's reaching for my grandmother, and through her, it's reaching for me. Della Monroe was once beautiful, like all the women in our family. But beauty in the Monroe line comes with a curse, a madness that starts as mood swings and ends in padded rooms and straitjackets. She gave birth to my mother Gladys during one of her more stable periods, but that stability never lasted long. When Gladys became pregnant with me, unmarried and barely able to care for herself, it was Della who arranged for the Bollenders to take me in. She convinced her daughter that she wasn't capable of raising a baby, and she was right. What Della didn't admit was that she wasn't capable of making rational decisions either. The Bollenders, Ida and Wayne, are devoutly Christian people who run a foster home filled with children who need love and stability. They live across the street from Della, close enough that she can watch my mother visit me on weekends, close enough that she can hear me crying when I'm hungry or scared. Too close for a woman who's losing her grip on reality. For months after returning from India, Della has been acting strangely. She talks to people who aren't there, she accuses neighbors of plotting against her, she walks around the neighborhood at all hours wearing inappropriate clothing or sometimes no clothing at all. The malaria has made her physically weak, but it's the degenerative heart disease and acute depression that are destroying her mind. She's had a stroke recently, and it's caused what the doctors will later call unpredictable shifts of mood and temper, along with horrifying hallucinations. But no one realizes how dangerous she's become until it's almost too late. On this particular July afternoon, something snaps inside Della's diseased mind. Maybe she hears voices telling her I'm in danger. Maybe she believes the Bollenders are poisoning me or stealing me away. Maybe she simply decides that death is preferable to the kind of life that awaits a Monroe woman. She leaves her house in broad daylight, wearing nothing but a confused expression and a determination that terrifies anyone who sees her. She walks the few yards to the Bollender home and pounds on the front door with an urgency that makes Ida's blood run cold. "I need to see the baby," Della says, but her voice is wrong, too high, too fast, like someone fighting to stay in control of thoughts that are spiraling away from her. Ida tries to refuse. She can see that something is very wrong with Della, can smell the sickness and desperation coming off her in waves. But Della is my grandmother, my blood relative, and in 1927, that means something that can't be easily dismissed. "The baby is dead," Della insists, her eyes wild with conviction. "You're hiding it from Gladys, but I know. I know the baby is dead, and I'm going to prove it." July 1927. The Bollender home. 2:30 p.m. Ida Bollender stands at her front door, looking into the wild eyes of Della Monroe, and every maternal instinct in her body screams danger. But social convention in 1927 demands respect for elders, especially grandparents, even when those grandparents are clearly unwell. "I heard the baby died," Della repeats, her voice getting higher with each word. "You're keeping it secret from Gladys, but I know. I can feel it. Death is in this house." "Mrs. Monroe, Norma Jean is perfectly fine," Ida says firmly, trying to keep her voice calm while positioning her body to block the doorway. "She's napping right now. Perhaps you should go home and rest." But Della pushes past her with surprising strength for a woman weakened by malaria and heart disease. When Ida tries to stop her, Della's elbow smashes through the glass panel of the front door, sending shards cascading to the floor. Blood runs down her arm, but she doesn't seem to notice. "Show me the baby," she demands, stumbling into the house like a woman possessed. "Show me the body." The sound of breaking glass wakes me from my nap, and I begin to cry, the normal healthy cry of a 1-year-old who's been startled awake. But to Della's diseased mind, my crying sounds like something else entirely. Something that confirms her worst delusions. Ida realizes she has no choice but to prove I'm alive. Maybe seeing me, healthy and whole, will snap Della back to reality. Maybe witnessing my obvious vitality will calm whatever storm is raging in her head. "All right," Ida says, carefully stepping over the broken glass. "I'll show you the baby. But then you need to leave." She leads Della down the hallway to my nursery, where I'm sitting up in my crib, tears streaming down my face but clearly alive, clearly well. For a moment, Della stares at me in confusion, as if she can't reconcile what she's seeing with what her mind has convinced her is true. "There," Ida says gently. "You can see she's perfectly healthy. She was just sleeping." Della nods slowly, but there's something flickering behind her eyes that makes Ida deeply uncomfortable. The grandmother reaches out tentatively, as if to touch my face, and I stop crying, curious about this stranger with the wild hair and blood on her arm. I need some water," Della says suddenly, pressing her hand to her forehead. "The heat. The malaria. I'm not thinking clearly." Relieved that Della seems to be calming down, Ida makes a fatal mistake. She leaves my grandmother alone with me while she goes to the kitchen to get water. It's only for a minute, maybe 2, but it's long enough for the madness to take complete control. When Ida returns to the nursery, carrying a glass of cool water and hoping Della will drink it and leave peacefully, she walks into a scene from her worst nightmare. Della is standing over my crib, pressing a pillow down over my face with both hands. I'm struggling underneath it, my tiny fists beating weakly against the fabric, my legs kicking in terror. "The baby's pillow slipped," Della says calmly when she sees Ida in the doorway. "I was just readjusting it." July 1927. The nursery. 2:35 p.m. For a split second, Ida Bollender freezes in the doorway, her mind unable to process what she's seeing. The woman standing over my crib isn't adjusting a pillow. She's using it as a weapon, pressing it down over my face with the methodical determination of someone who believes she's performing a mercy killing. My muffled cries are getting weaker. "Get away from her!" Ida screams, dropping the glass of water and lunging across the room. The sound of breaking glass fills the nursery for the second time that day as Ida tackles Della, fighting to pull the pillow away from my face. Despite her illness, Della is surprisingly strong, fueled by the conviction that she's doing the right thing. "You don't understand," Della pants as they struggle. "She's going to suffer like all Monroe women suffer. This is mercy. This is love." But Ida is fighting for more than just my life. She's fighting for her own sanity, for her faith in humanity, for the belief that some things are sacred and cannot be touched by madness. She manages to grab the pillow and fling it across the room, then scoops me up in her arms, pressing my face against her shoulder. I'm gasping and crying, but I'm alive. The future Marilyn Monroe will live to see another day, though the trauma of this moment will echo through my subconscious for the rest of my life. Della stands in the middle of the nursery, blood dripping from her elbow, her face blank with confusion. The moment of clarity that drove her to attempt murder has passed, leaving behind only a sick old woman who can't remember why she's standing in someone else's house. I was just... She stammers, looking around the room as if she's never seen it before. "The baby was crying." Ida backs toward the door, still clutching me protectively. She knows she needs to call the police, but she also knows that Della Monroe is Gladys's mother, my grandmother, and the scandal of what just happened could destroy what little stability my mother has left. "You need to leave," Ida says firmly. "Now. And you can never come back here." Della nods vacantly and wanders out of the nursery, out of the house, and back across the street. She leaves behind a trail of blood, broken glass, and the kind of trauma that changes everyone it touches. For the next few weeks, Ida watches Della's house nervously, waiting for another outbreak of madness. She doesn't tell Gladys what happened. How do you explain to a mentally fragile mother that her own mother tried to kill her baby? Instead, she simply refuses all future visits from Della and hopes the incident was an isolated moment of insanity. But it wasn't isolated. It was a warning. On August 4, 1927, exactly 1 month after the attempt on my life, Della Monroe is committed to Norwalk State Hospital with a diagnosis of manic-depressive psychosis. 19 days later, she dies of heart failure during a manic seizure, taking her secrets and her madness to the grave. The family doesn't talk about what happened in that nursery, but the story becomes part of Monroe family lore, whispered among relatives and passed down like a cautionary tale. 1934. 7 years later. I'm 8 years old when the curse that claimed my grandmother reaches for my mother. I'm living with Gladys again, in the small house she bought in Hollywood, trying to build the family life we never had. For a few months, it almost works. She takes me to movies, shows me how film editing works at her job, tells me stories about the stars on screen. But then the same demons that destroyed Della begin whispering to Gladys. It starts with sleepless nights and paranoid whispers about people trying to steal me away. Gladys peers out windows like she's watching for enemies, checks the locks on doors multiple times before bed, jumps at sounds that aren't there. "They want to take you from me," she tells me one night, her eyes wild with the same madness I'm too young to recognize. "Just like they took Jackie and Bernice. But I won't let them." I don't understand that she's talking about my half-siblings, the children her first husband kidnapped and took to Kentucky. I don't know that their loss broke something inside her that never healed properly. All I know is that my mother is scaring me. Then comes the phone call that pushes her over the edge. Her son Jackie, my half-brother, has died of kidney disease at age 13. The child she lost to custody battles, the boy she never got to raise, is gone forever. The news hits Gladys like a physical blow. She screams and laughs and cries all at the same time, talking to Jackie as if he's standing in the room with us. She blames herself for his death, claims that if she'd fought harder to keep him, he'd still be alive. Within weeks, more bad news arrives. Her grandfather has committed suicide, hanging himself in a moment of despair that mirrors the mental illness running through our family like a genetic time bomb. I watch my mother disintegrate in real time. She stops eating, stops sleeping, starts seeing conspiracies everywhere. She accuses our boarders, the Atkinsons, of poisoning our food. She becomes convinced that I'm not really her daughter, that someone has replaced me with an imposter. The final break comes on a hot January morning in 1934. I wake up to find Gladys in the kitchen, holding a butcher knife and screaming about people trying to break into our house. When George Atkinson tries to calm her down, she lunges at him with the blade. "They're here for Norma Jean," she shrieks. "They want to take her like they took the others." The police arrive to find my mother barricaded in her bedroom, convinced that everyone in the house is working for mysterious enemies who want to steal her daughter. She fights them like a wild animal as they drag her away, still screaming my name, still trying to protect me from threats that exist only in her fractured mind. As I watch them carry her out on a stretcher, I realize that I'm truly alone now. Both my grandmother and my mother have been claimed by the same madness, the same family curse that turns love into violence and protection into destruction. The diagnosis is the same one that killed Della, paranoid schizophrenia with manic-depressive episodes. 1962. Brentwood, California. Final months. I'm 36 years old, lying in my bed at 12305 Fifth Helena Drive, and I can still feel that pillow pressing down on my face. The attack happened 35 years ago, when I was too young to form conscious memories, but my body remembers. My nervous system remembers. My DNA remembers. Every panic attack I've ever had feels like suffocating. Every time someone gets too close to my face while I'm sleeping, I wake up fighting. Every relationship I've ever been in has been poisoned by the fear that love and violence are the same thing in the Monroe family. Arthur Miller used to ask me why I was so afraid of being touched when I was vulnerable. I could never explain that somewhere in my cellular memory lives the knowledge that the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. Dr. Green's son, my psychiatrist, thinks my fear of abandonment stems from being placed in foster care. He doesn't understand that it goes deeper than that. I'm not just afraid of being left. I'm afraid of becoming the one who leaves, the one who hurts, the one who destroys everything she touches. I've spent my entire career being beautiful and desirable and safe for other people. Marilyn Monroe is the fantasy woman who never gets angry, never gets violent, never presses pillows over anyone's face. But Norma Jean Baker knows what runs in her blood. The pills I take every night aren't just for sleep, they're to keep the madness at bay. Every time I feel my mood swing too high or too low, every time I hear voices that aren't there or see conspiracies that don't exist, I remember Della and Gladys and reach for chemical salvation. But lately, the pills aren't working as well. Lately, I can hear the same whispers that drove my grandmother to attempted murder and my mother to a lifetime in institutions. They tell me that the people around me are using me, betraying me, planning to destroy me. When Bobby Kennedy stopped taking my calls, when Jack Kennedy pretended he never knew me, when the studio fired me from Something's Got to Give, the voices got louder. They told me that everyone I've ever trusted has been plotting against me, that my death has been planned for months, that I'm just another inconvenient Monroe woman who needs to be eliminated. I try to fight back with facts and logic, but the family curse doesn't respond to rational thought. It responds to blood, to genetics, to the inevitable progression of a mental illness that has claimed every woman in my maternal line. Tonight, as I take what will be my final handful of pills, I wonder if this is how it felt for Della when she picked up that pillow. Did she think she was saving me from something worse? Did she believe that death was kinder than the life that awaited a Monroe woman? I think about the baby I was, helpless in that crib, and the woman I became, still helpless, still fighting for breath, still waiting for someone to save me from the madness that runs in my family like poison. Present day, the truth about trauma. 60 years after Marilyn Monroe's death, mental health experts finally understand what she couldn't have known in 1962. Trauma experienced in infancy, even trauma we can't consciously remember, shapes our entire neurological development. That pillow pressed over 1-year-old Norma Jean's face didn't just threaten her life, it rewired her brain for a lifetime of fear. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, a leading trauma researcher, explains that the body keeps the score of every traumatic experience, especially those that occur before we develop language. Marilyn's panic attacks, her fear of suffocation, her terror of being alone, all of these can be traced back to that moment when her grandmother tried to end her life. The attempted murder wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a family pattern that modern psychiatry recognizes as intergenerational trauma. Della Monroe died of heart failure during a manic seizure while committed to Norwalk State Hospital, and Gladys spent most of her time from 1934 until the 1960s in psychiatric facilities. What makes Marilyn's story even more tragic is that she was acutely aware of her genetic predisposition to mental illness. Arthur Miller told the BBC that her mother was quite mad. Throughout most of her life, Marilyn often remarked how she could still vividly recall these horrific encounters. She lived in constant fear that she would follow the same path as the women before her. Modern DNA research has revealed another layer to this family curse. The mental illness that plagued the Monroe women may have been exacerbated by undiagnosed medical conditions. Della Mae's wild behavior was not caused by mental illness, but by degenerative heart disease which caused acute depressions, compounded by a stroke according to some biographers. But Marilyn's survival of that first attack in 1927 also reveals something extraordinary about her resilience. Despite being born into a family where love was expressed through violence, where protection meant suffocation, where mental illness was passed down like a family heirloom, she managed to become the most famous woman in the world. The baby who was almost murdered by her grandmother grew up to be a cultural icon whose image represents beauty, vulnerability, and strength in equal measure. She transformed her trauma into art, her pain into performance, her fear into the kind of magnetic presence that still captivates audiences decades later. Child development experts now recognize that Marilyn's intense need to be loved, her fear of abandonment, and her ability to become whatever others wanted her to be were all survival mechanisms developed in response to early trauma. The same hypervigilance that made her paranoid also made her extraordinarily sensitive to what others needed from her. Today, we understand that healing intergenerational trauma requires more than just individual therapy. It requires acknowledging the patterns, breaking the cycles, and refusing to pass the damage to the next generation. Marilyn Monroe never had children, which means the Monroe family curse ended with her. She survived her grandmother's attempt to kill her at 1 year old, only to spend her entire life fighting the same demons that drove Della to that pillow. In the end, the trauma won, but not before Marilyn Monroe showed the world that even the most damaged people can create something beautiful. Subscribe for more untold stories of Hollywood's hidden traumas. Like this video if you believe survivors deserve to have their truth told. And remember, sometimes the greatest stars shine brightest because they've learned to transform their darkness into light.